Okay. So if your mind is not already full of all kinds of technology, I'm going to fill it with even more technology now. And we're going to talk about blockchain again. So my colleague Hervoy spoke about how we can use, as archivists, blockchain potentially to address the problem of expiring digital certificates and digital signatures. What I'm going to talk about is how governments are actually creating new blockchain records that we as archivists may actually have to ingest into the archives and manage. Blockchain, government blockchain record keeping, you can get the definition. So what are we talking about when we're talking about blockchain technology? The definition that we're coming up with in the International Standards Organization Technical Committee on Blockchain and Distributed Ledgers is here. I'll read it in case we should maybe translate it. A type of distributed ledger with confirmed and validated blocks organized in an append-only chain with each block cryptographically linked to a prior block. It's meant to be tamper-resistant and it's meant to be immutable, lasting. This is what makes blockchain really quite different than some of the other technologies like database technologies that we've looked at before, because database technologies and some of the other information processing technologies that use computers make records mutable. They allow us to extract data from records, and this is what is the basis of big data analytics. But it's also the basis of what Luciana referred to previously as some of the issues we're having around fake news and what we heard about yesterday with cybersecurity attacks. So the mutability of records is a problem that we as archivists are dealing with. We don't know if we can trust our records. And blockchain is promising, maybe not delivering yet, but promising to be a technology that can bring back trust through tamper resistance and immutability. I'd like to say that the work on T307 is with my colleagues here, Natasha Nandro-Kromtovsky, and also my colleague Hervoy Stanchik. We work together to define the international standards. And the reason that's important is because we are all experts in archival science. So the IT, the scientists are not necessarily running the show on this one. We are actually laying the standards based on archival science, good archival science theory and practice. This is very important. So blockchain technology is itself a record-keeping system, and it is used for record-keeping. So when Luciana said it's not really a record-keeping system, what she meant to say is, well, it is being used as a record-keeping system, but it's not necessarily one that delivers us yet trusted records. There's still an open engineering challenge to be solved. Okay, so it promises it, but there's work to be done because it's such a new technology. So it's the new type of record, and it's promising immutability. It's what we want for our records and what we have to achieve. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of work to be done. But let's look at what's happening right now. IBM did a study. They surveyed 200 government officials all around the world in 16 countries, and they found out that 14% of those government officials actually plan to implement blockchain record keeping this year. It's happening right now. It's happening in my own province of British Columbia, where the province of British Columbia has created their business registry in a blockchain. They're rolling it out this month. Incredible. The Land Titles Authority in Sweden, they're on their third pilot. It's very advanced. Again, in British Columbia, where I come from, the Land Titles and Survey Authority have already started to experiment with land title records on the blockchain. So we as archivists, we need to get ready for this because these are the records we're going to have to manage in the future, these blockchain records. So I run at the University of British Columbia a research cluster. It's multidisciplinary. It comprises 25 faculty, led by an archival scientist, but it includes engineers, computer scientists, researchers. It includes forestry management researchers, political scientists. And we take a multidisciplinary view because why? This technology really, it demands it. So it might be a record-keeping technology, and I focus in this middle layer, the data records layer, but it also enables social transformation in the way that it's being used. For example, we might have to change our laws and our regulations to accommodate this technology, and it also requires technical innovation. How are we going to achieve all this? If we have a lot of transactions running on the blockchain, we need very scalable technology for this. So the project that I want to focus on today is one called Records in the Chain, where we're looking at cases of how blockchain is being used for record keeping all around the world. It's still in its early phases, but we've looked primarily right now at medical record keeping on chain. We've looked at land records on chain and identity management on chain. And we'll move out to other use cases as we move forward with the project. So what are we finding? First of all, why are governments adopting this very early stage technology? What's their reason for it? I think one of the motivators is what we've heard today. There's a lack of trust in the existing technology. Governments are worried about this. They're worried about fake news. They're worried about not being able to protect their data. And it's becoming really important because if we're talking about a world of artificial intelligence, we've heard about that at the conference, heard about how artificial intelligence is building models based on information. If we build these models on untrustworthy information, those models will be untrustworthy as well. Okay? So if we are making decisions based on these models, and they're being used, for example, in self-driving cars, now they're being used in medical instrumentation, surgery. If we're using our archives in these ways, we better be able to trust them. We better be able to trust the models that we use, and to trust the models, we have to trust the data. There's a real incentive to go back to archival principles. So we want to be able to have big data that we can extract, we can make new models, but archival principles are really, really important. So there's a role now for archivists again. I think that we really need to work with this and say we're the people to talk to if you want to be able to trust your data. So they're also afraid of being disrupted too. So even if governments don't really have a good reason, like in my own province, the BC Land Registration Authority, they're still going ahead because they're afraid we're going to get disrupted. So we have to make sure that we're ahead of the game. So they're trying it out for size. So, but they're running into some challenges. They're taking it slow and easy because of these challenges. First of all, they're worried, well, blockchain, it's got to do with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, right? Isn't that used by criminals and money launderers? Should we really be trusting our government records, to the technology that's used for criminal activity? So what's happening is we have to disassociate the underlying technology of blockchain from the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. They were very closely associated in the origins of this technology in 2008, but now they're becoming separate and distinct. So, but there's still a resistance there. The technology, as I mentioned, it's still under construction. International standards that we're working on, still under construction. So we don't really have a reliable foundation yet. It's a little bit like shifting sands. We also lack trained personnel. So, for example, where do you find software developers in blockchain? Internationally, there are very few universities that are actually developing highly skilled people in blockchain. So University of British Columbia has just started. We have a summer institute that I'm going back to run, and we're starting to train people, archivists in this technology, but there's a global demand for this. And as a result, it's very hard for governments to find people that they can really rely on to give them good information. And then, of course, existing laws pose barriers. So as an example, in BC, province of British Columbia, where I come from, in order to actually change to a blockchain record-keeping system, you would have to change the law for how you transact land, how you move land from one person to another. So that's happening all around the world. What are governments doing to transition to blockchain? They're doing small pilots. So this is an example of how, if you wanted to implement a pilot in your government, how you might go about it. So you would start with, well, how do I want to apply blockchain in my government? And then you would study what's going on around the world. You would then figure out what your requirements are for blockchain. You would maybe design a challenge. You have your software developers come and do a hackathon to give you some ideas about how you might do this, or run a global design challenge. So we worked on one this summer with around medical record keeping. And we worked on another one this fall with the BC Land Titles and Survey Authority. And then you do rapid prototyping. So you very quickly build the solution, and then you start to test it out. Now, you don't replace anything at this point, you're just testing. And I really recommend this approach to archivists. Get involved in these kinds of activities to get to know the technology, because it's really the best way to understand. I started off as a traditional archivist. I now teach in the program that I graduated from. So I started off just with paper records. And I've made the transition through the digital age to learn about technology. I only started studying blockchain technology in 2015. But what's kept me going and understanding this technology is a good theoretical foundation. So Luciana was right earlier on this morning when she said, archival theory is really important. If you understand the principles, it doesn't matter what technology you're looking at. Those principles will be the same, and the rest is down to technical detail. And I hope that's an encouraging message for all of you, because if I can start off learning this technology, I think anybody can, really. Okay, so blockchain is being used for lots of different use cases in government. As I mentioned, it's being used for land titles. One of the technologies that they layer over blockchain to make it usable for transfer of land is something called smart contracts, which is computer code that runs on the blockchain. It executes autonomously. So it's just like a little computer software program that says, I'm going to transfer this land from person A to person B. When we start to see how blockchain is being used, this is a typology of different types of record-keeping systems we've come up with on the blockchain. So here we have, the first one we have is MIR. An example of that is how they're using blockchain in Estonia for medical record-keeping. So they have their Estonian health records database, which is a traditional Oracle database. And then what they're doing is they're hashing all those records onto a private permissioned blockchain using guard time is the company that they're using. This is loosely called a blockchain because technically it's not, they don't use blocks. We might call it more of a distributed ledger. But in any case, the idea is that it's for integrity checking. So no new records are being created on chain, just the hashes of the records. So it's the kind of thing that Hervoy was talking about, a similar sort of idea to the Truster model. When we get into the Swedish land transaction recording, though, this is a pilot in its third phase. It's very mature, between the Swedish Land Registry Authority, the Swedish banks, also the Swedish telecom company, and a private blockchain company and a consulting company. Those are the organizations involved in this pilot. They are using smart contracts, and they're actually creating new types of blockchain records. These are born digital blockchain records. These are the records we're going to have to archive in the future. So, totally new type of record. The final one is the tokenized record-keeping system. The example of this is land transaction recording in Brazil. Now we have a system where we're not just creating records on chain, but we're taking actual physical assets, in this case land, but it could be fine wine, diamonds, artwork, it doesn't matter what, and we're dematerializing it. We're dematerializing it, and we're describing it using metadata. And so not only are the transactions happening on chain and creating records, but these assets are actually trading in a dematerialized form on the blockchain. So two things going on here. It's kind of crazy. I've likened it to medieval times when archives not only held maybe parchment scrolls, but actually rings, gold cups, valuable swords. We're going to be going back to the days where we had treasuries. So here's what the Estonian infrastructure looks like. So you see here, here's the medical records database, and here's where it's being hashed onto the guard time blockchain, okay, for integrity checking purposes. Here's the example of the Swedish land registration case. So you have here your banks, your buyers, your sellers. You have an ID registration, which is managed by the telecoms company. Here's the blockchain going on over here. And here's what the new records look like. That's the new record. That's a smart contract. So the new paleography is going to be reading computer code. We'll have to learn how to read these kinds of records in the future and understand them in the same way as we understand ancient script. Computer script will become a new skill that archivists will need with blockchain records. And then finally, the Brazilian land transaction example. So what happens here is that the records are put from the registry onto a blockchain. The land is tokenized. It's turned into a Bitcoin, basically. And then the idea is that you can trade the land peer-to-peer. So it's very early stage. They're not quite there yet. The Land Registration Authority is still involved. But the idea is that you wouldn't eventually need the Land Registration Authority. If I wanted to sell you land, I just say, well, I'm going to send you my land as a coin, and I'll just sign it with my private key, and I'll send it to you just like I send a Bitcoin. So it's the world of going completely peer-to-peer and just transacting land or whatever it is from one person to the next. You can read all the technical details here. That's the URL to read the technical study, and it's got all the details of how the infrastructure actually works, what they use, and also an assessment, an archival theoretic evaluation. So, you know, what happens with accuracy? What happens with reliability? What happens with authenticity? Can we as archivists trust this? Okay. And so finally, just wanted to say that if you want more information, you can Google blockchain at UBC and find out more about our research group and the projects that we have going on. We continue our Records in the Chain project. We're publishing lots of new studies, and we're looking at it through this archival theoretic lens. I will say that there is a lot of work to be done because we don't have a mechanism for long-term preservation of archival records yet on the blockchain or preservation chain. But I am hopeful in that it's the first time in a long time that I've seen the world in general, you know, outside of archivists, start to worry about, can we trust our records? How do we make our records immutable? So we should work with blockchain engineers, blockchain developers, to help them develop this technology in accordance with archival principles. Thanks.